extends his love and he extends his glory through carrying persuasion, not through coercive domination. It is so important for us to understand that God extends his love, he extends his glory through carrying persuasion, and he doesn't do it through coercive domination. Just think about this for a moment. Think about the last thing that you did that was right. Everybody got that in mind? The last thing that you did that was right. How did you end up doing that? Did God just overwhelm you and make you do that? He didn't do that. Just think about the last thing you did was wrong. Did God just step in and prevent you from doing it? He doesn't operate through coercive domination. He does it through told on you wanted some grace and mercy. See, God doesn't give us the opportunity to tell him how he ought to do that. All right. God extends his glory and his love through carrying persuasion, not through coercive domination. Now, though God is all powerful, he does not exercise all power in making angels and people do what's right. He doesn't do that. Now, we shared all that information with you, and then carrying persuasion allows freedom to choose. Let's say that together. Carrying persuasion allows freedom to choose. Say that again. Carrying persuasion allows freedom to choose. One more time. Carrying persuasion allows freedom to choose. So when God persuades, when God controls, when he interacts with the world through carrying persuasion, there is the opportunity for rebellion. And carrying persuasion allows freedom to choose, and freedom to choose allows for the probability of the rejection of God. See, if God had made us as robots and gave us no say-so, then we could have never rebelled. Listen, your car operates like a robot. Your car has never gotten up and then parked itself in somebody else's driveway. Your car stays right where you leave it. It does exactly what you say. So carrying persuasion allows for the freedom to choose. And freedom to choose allows for rejection. And it is the rejection of God that brought evil into the world. It's the rejection of God that brought evil into the world. Every place where God is rejected, evil is on the horizon. Evil is injected into the world because we reject God. So we look in the schools, reject God. Evil is creeping in, has crept in government, in the workplace, even in the home. And unfortunately, sometimes people even reject God in the church. And if you do that, guess what? Evil will be there. So it's the rejection of God that brought about evil. If we had never rejected God, we would never be plagued with evil. Ain't that something? If Adam and Eve and if no person had ever rejected God, we would never have a hurricane destroying people's lives. We would never have murdering. All of that is because we have rejected God. And so that ought to cause us to try to persuade people to embrace God. Now, we shared all that with you last week. That's review. Let's give you some new material now. Now, the nature of creation is God does it through carrying persuasion, not through coercive domination. So the nature of creation itself allows for the possibility of evil. When angels rejected God, they promoted evil. When human beings rejected God, they promoted evil. So evil came into the world because first angels rejected God and then human beings rejected God. Listen, rejected God. That's what brought about evil. That's what brought about evil. Listen, if the person that picked up his pistol yesterday and went and shot somebody, if he had accepted God's commandment to love one another, guess what? He would have never done that. So evil is because we have rejected God. So be very careful about entities that keep rejecting God. We cannot keep rejecting God and expect the world to get better. It's never going to happen. It is utterly impossible for us to reject God and improve the world. It is impossible for an individual to reject God and then their life improve. It doesn't happen that way. It's never, ever going to happen. So, when we reject God, we get in for trouble every time. Now, the will of God is a determining factor in how things turn out. Now, make sure you get this. The will of God is a factor. Let's say that together. The will of God is a factor. Say that again. The will of God is a factor. The will of God is a factor. It is a determining factor in the outcomes within the universe. The will of God is a factor. Now notice, I did not say it is the only factor. I said the will of God is a factor. Well, how does God exert his will? Through carrying persuasion. Through carrying persuasion. Now let's think about this for a moment. How many of you have been in the grocery store and you saw a parent begging and pleading with their child to do something, and you were standing there saying, I'd have snatched that little boy up and gave him some belt. I wouldn't have stood there no 10 minutes pleading with him. Anybody ever thought like that? Don't raise your hand. Anybody thought like that? Okay. Now, but guess what? That carrying persuasion from the parent may have worked. It may have worked, but guess what? It took a little longer. It took a little longer. Now, if you're in my age category, at the moment that parent said something, you were on your way to do it. But not now. Now, I learned this from my oldest son. I don't know whether he ever whipped his children or not. And sometimes I would be singing, man, I'd be done snatching that little boy up. And I'd get up now and give him a whipping if his mama wasn't here. I'm just kidding. My daughter-in-law might be watching the program. Yeah, I would. If I thought I should have whipped him, I'd have whipped him. I didn't care who was there. He was at my house. But here's what I learned. He has great control over his children. And he did it differently than the way I did it. But sometimes he would have to say to his children 2 or 3 times. He used carrying persuasion. I use coercive domination. But guess what? It was effective. Now, that wouldn't have fit my personality, but it fit his. And at the end of the day, great relationship with his grown sons, great obedience from his grown son, as good as I had with mine, and he used carrying persuasion. But guess what? During that period of time, I'm standing here saying, I don't know why he doesn't do something. And that's how we are with God. Why doesn't he do something? But he is doing something. He's doing it through carrying persuasion. He's not doing it through coercive domination. So the will of God is a determining factor in the outcomes within the universe. So now, what is one of the determining factors? And say it like you believe it. What's one of the determining factors? The will of God. The will of God. The will of God is a factor in how things are going to happen. But now stay with me. Opposition to the will of God is also a factor. Opposition to the will of God is a determining factor in the outcomes within the universe. Why did Cain kill Abel? Because of opposition to the will of God. Why did Cain, in the process of time, why did he bring an offering? Because of his opposition to the will of God. Why did the flood come? Because there were people living in opposition to the will of God. So the will of God is a factor, but opposition to the will of God is also a factor. Now, if only the will of God was a factor, we'd have a beautiful life. But opposition to the will of God is a determining factor in the outcomes of what's going to happen. So when angels rebel, when human beings rebel, it becomes a determining factor. Now, let me illustrate it this way. How many of you remember when your children were a baby? As a parent, you got a chance to determine everything that your child wore. You got a chance to determine everything that your child ate. You got a chance to determine everywhere your child went. You got a chance to determine everything that your child heard. But by the time that child, before he got to be a teenager, you were not the only influencer in your child's life. Until they went to school, they loved green beans. They went to school and found out it's not cool to eat green beans. So your child comes home and says, I don't like green beans. You've been eating green beans all your life. See, you're no longer a determinant. You are a factor, but you are not the only factor. Now, sometimes parents feel so bad when their children don't do what they told them to do. And they think that I failed as a parent. Well, you may have failed as a parent, but not necessarily. Because you are not the only factor in determining what your child believes, what they think, and how they behave. Because when they are outside of your circle, they are heavily influenced. And they are influenced sometimes while they are in our circle by the things that we let them see on television. There are other factors. There are other factors. Your children ever done something and you look at them and say, where you get that from? They didn't get it from you. They got it somewhere else. So guess what? God looks at us sometime and says, where you get that from? Now, he knows where it came from. It came from the devil. We didn't get it from him. So the will of God is a determining factor. Opposition to the will of God is a determining factor also. Therefore, pay close attention to this. Everything that happens is not according to the preferred will of God. Let me say that again. Everything that happens is not according to the preferred will of God. Everything that happens is not God's will. Everything that happened is not the way God wanted it to happen. God never wanted Cain to kill Abel. He never wanted that. He never wanted to have to destroy the world with the flood, but because of evil, it made it necessary to do it. So everything that happens is not according to the preferred will of God. Now turn to John chapter 12 and verse 31. John 12 and verse 31. Quickly, John 12 and verse 31. We'll have it on the screen for you. John 12 and verse 31. I think we'll have it on the screen. John 12 and verse 31. All right. Now judgment is upon this world. Everybody see that? John 12 and verse 31. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Now that's what Jesus said. He said the ruler of this world will be cast out. Well, why he's casting him out? Because he's not operating according to the will of God. So everything that happens is not according to the will of God. Now turn quickly to 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse number 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse number 3. And now pay close attention to this. And even if our gospel is veiled, the King James translation says hidden, I believe. Amen. It is veiled, and when you put a veil over your eye, whatever is out there is hidden. Even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are what? Perishing. Now look at verse 4. In whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving Now Paul refers to Satan as what? The God of this world. Why does he call him the God of this world? Because Satan is ruling in this world. He's a ruling factor. The will of God is not the only determining factor. Now look again at verse number 4. In whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Now notice what Satan does. Even Satan does not operate by coercive domination. He persuades people by attacking their mind. Protect your mind. Protect your mind. Train your children to protect your mind. That's why you can't put chemicals and foreign substances in your body, because it will adversely affect your mind, and your mentality will not be as logical and as rational as it should have been. All right. Now let's go to 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8. The one who practices sin is of the devil. See, the devil is a factor. The one who practices sin is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, that he might do what? Destroy the works of the devil. Now, there's a competition going on in the world. You got the force of good and God, the force of evil and the devil. And the battlefield is the mind. The battlefield. So the devil is competing for your mind, and God is competing for your mind. It's up to you to decide who you let win. Now just imagine, here is a beautiful girl in high school, and there are two guys that wants to take her to the movie this weekend, and they are competing. But a decision is going to be made. Now, they don't need the boys fighting against each other, because the competition is not against him. The competition is where? In the mind of the girl. So because based upon what takes place in her mind, that's which one of the guys will have her for the date. So there is a war going on, and that war is for the mind. The devil is competing for our mind, and God's trying to get our mind. The question is, whose mind? Who will we surrender our mind to? So here's the question we must always ask ourselves: is my mind being surrendered to the devil? Is my mind? See, the devil is smart. He knows what appeals to the mind. And so there is a war. Now, why does evil in general exist? Evil in general exists because angels and human beings rejected God. Why does evil in general exist? Because angels and human beings rejected God. Why does evil in general exist? Because angels and human beings rejected God. Now I'm going to ask you the question: why does evil in general exist? Let me ask you again. We got it on this side. Now you all over here making my sermon longer. Didn't want to be here this long, but we had to wait on you all, okay? They got it over here. All right. Now, why does evil in general exist? So when people talk about why is there so much evil, just look at them and say, because angels and human beings rejected God. That's why. That's why angels and human beings rejected God. That's why evil exists. Angels and human beings rejected God. That's why. It's a rejection of God. So guess what? If it's the rejection of God that causes evil, the only way to get away from this evil is acceptance of God. That's what makes the church so relevant. That's what makes the church so important, because the church is the only institution in town talking to folk about God. Matter of fact, it's probably illegal to go down to City Hall. The judge down there can't talk that much about God. That's our role and responsibility. Now, you know what's so sad, though? The role of the church is to persuade people to embrace God. And we've got the church out here doing everything else except what God's told us to do. And then not doing what he told us to do. Our job is to persuade people to accept Christ. That's how we overcome evil. Because evil came in, why? You ain't got that. We got to spend some more time. You got to have this so that when somebody asks you at Kroger grocery store, it is just like you've been sitting here waiting for them to ask you with this question. Okay? Why does evil in general exist? That's right. Because angels and human beings rejected God. Now watch this. You could say to your child look at you and say, why are you whipping me? Because you rejected my instructions. There's a cause and effect relationship. Why am I in jail? Because I robbed the bank. Why does evil in general exist? Angels and human beings rejected God. And we are still rejecting God. That's why evil continues to exist. Now listen to this one. Now I said evil in general. Now pay close attention to this. Now, why does evil in specific exist? Why does this specific instance of evil in my life exist? Well, angels and humans rejected God, but we may not know what the specific behavior that brought this about. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why did this happen to me? Why did somebody steal my purse? Why did that happen to me? Why did somebody back into my car and drive off? Why did I get fired? Why did this happen to me? Or why did this happen to my family? And sometimes we ask ourselves, did I do something wrong? Did I do something wrong? I remember when I was growing up, one of our church members' house burned up. And I remember hearing a conversation from some adults, and they were trying to figure out, why did their house burn up? And so they concluded that they must have did some wrong praying. See, sometimes, and there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of issues. Well, why did this happen? Did I disobey God? Well, evil exists in general because angels and human beings have rejected God, but that does not mean that we will be. Satan entered the heart of Judas. So Satan rebelled. He entered the heart of Judas, and then what did Judas do? Rebel. All right, listen, the person who robbed your house may have decided, well, let me tell you a true story. In a place called Bolivar, Tennessee, several years ago, a house was burned up and 7 people were burned to death in the house. And nobody could figure out how 7 grown men were burned up in that house. Here's what happened. There was 9 people there gambling. One man lost his money. He and another man left and decided to come back and rob all of the gamblers. They came back and tied all of them in a chair, robbed them, and set the house afire. And for weeks, nobody could figure out who did this. Now, someone would say, well, this man lost his money and he wanted his money back, and he went and robbed those people. The guy who did that was a big guy. And you won't believe what story he told when he was finally arrested. He was married to a little thin woman. Now, his story is his wife had told him to quit gambling. He went out and lost the money again. And he was scared of his wife. So he was scared to go home without the money. So he went and robbed those people and killed all of them in the fire. They were burned alive in the house. They were all wired in the chairs. Now, what caused that? Did the man, that's not the source. Is his wife the source? No. At the end of it, Satan. But there was a lot of factors involved. Who got the man gambling in the first place? Could have been his bigger brother. So see, there's a lot of factors. So don't, listen, here's what we do know. At the root cause of all evil is Satan. And the next step is rejection of God. But we don't know all of the rejection steps. So don't spend your time trying to figure that out. Just know the devil is the cause. Jesus has come to overthrow the devil. Amen. So what we ought to do, instead of trying to figure out all of the connecting dots, is just help Jesus overthrow Satan, and we won't have a problem with evil. Amen. We help Jesus overthrow Satan, and guess what? We won't have a problem. There's one. God's always working. He's working through carrying persuasion. And as a result of this sermon, here's what God wants you to do. Surrender to the rescue. Jesus has come to rescue us. My friend, Jesus is the answer. Amen. He has come to rescue us. He has come to overthrow and overcome Satan. Listen to this passage of scripture. You know that he appeared, talking about Jesus, in order to take away sins. And in him there is no sin. 1 John 3 and verse 5. My friend, Jesus is the answer. We don't know all the steps of the problem, but we know that Jesus is the answer. If you happen to get sick, you said, Doc, why do I have high blood pressure? You know what? The factors that brought about your high blood pressure may have started when you were 5 years old. Don't spend your time trying to figure out all those dots. What you need to figure out is, Doc, how can I get it down? How can I get it down? So don't waste your time trying to figure out all the people that the devil has used and all of the connecting dots. Just help Jesus overcome sin in the world. Well, how do we do that? We start by taking sin out of our own lives individually. By believing that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Repenting of sin, confessing him to be Lord and Christ. Being identified with Jesus in the waters of baptism. When we are baptized, God adds us to his church, known of in this community as the Church of Christ. Now what we do, the church then becomes the body of Christ that becomes God's instrument in the world, competing for the mind of people so we can minimize evil in the world. Amen. In just a moment, we're going to sing a song, number 303, Just As I Am. That's how God accepts us, just how we are, so that he can make us who it is that we ought to become. Amen. Let's stand and sing 303, Just As I Am. Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou biddest me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come.